There are all kinds of different ploys and tricks you can use at the poker table. This trick I'm going to share with you is best suited for no-limit hold'em tournaments. It's a pretty specific situation, so first, let me set the stage for you. You're in a no-limit hold'em tournament, and you're sitting on a pretty short stack in relation to the other players. The blinds are now 200, 400 with a 50 ante, and you have 3,200 in chips left. Everyone folds to the button who's sitting on a huge stack of 82,000, and he raises the pot to 1,200. Okay, so the small blind folds, and you're in the big blind with ace-queen, and you feel like it rates to be the best hand. The dilemma you now face is, A, go all in right now and raise your last 2,000, or B, just call the bet and see what hits the flop first. On the surface, most of you probably instinctively would go all in before the flop, but after you hear what I have to tell you, you'll hopefully understand why it's often much better to go with option B. Here's why. Now, you presume that the button is on a steal raise, but since he has so many chips, he's likely to call your $2,000 re-raise with virtually any two cards. Now, if he does call the raise with a hand like King 10, it's not all that bad, but it's not all that great either. He'll now have a chance to look at all 5 cards and will knock you out about, 38% of the time. If you thought that based on your opponent's tendencies that he might actually fold for another 2,000, then moving all in would actually be the correct play. However, that's just not very likely in this case. See, your opponent would have to call 2,000 to win about 5,000. Not many hands are that big an underdog before the flop. In fact, calling with a hand as bad as deuce-3 offsuit isn't such a bad idea in that case. A lowly deuce-3 is going to beat ace-king about 34% of the time. That's less than a 2-to-1 underdog. Okay, so now that we've established that your opponent will likely call your all-in raise, why don't we want that if we think ace-queen is the best hand? Well, in tournament poker, it's all about survival, and sometimes you must sacrifice value in order to survive. If we wait till after the flop, we can increase our chances of winning the pot just by a little bit. This play is known as the stop-and-go play. Instead of going all in before the flop, what you would do is just call the $1,200 raise from the player on the button, and then hope to use the 2,000 you have left to force your opponent out after the flop, thus protecting the 3,000 in the pot. When you make your call before the flop, you must be committed to moving the rest of your chips all in, pretty much regardless of the flop. The only time you might want to divert from that plan is if you flop a strong hand, say, you flop a straight or something. Otherwise, if the flop comes 9-6-4, 8-3-3, or even King 7 deuce, you should bet your last 2,000 in the hopes that your opponent's going to fold. Who knows? You may even be able to bluff your opponent as well. If, for example, the flop comes Jack 10-9 and your opponent has a pair of fours, he'll probably just give up right there. If, as we mentioned in a previous example, your opponent had King 10 and the flop comes 9-6-4, your $2,000 bet may very well force your opponent to fold here too. If your opponent calls after the flop, he's only going to win the pot approximately 25% of the time. Calling would be a mistake for him, but it would also be a positive result for you. By using the stop-and-go play, you not only increase your chances of survival, but you can force your opponent into a mistake if he calls. If you were to go all in before the flop, well, your opponent would be absolutely correct in calling with King 10. But after the flop, by using the stop-and-go play, he would be making an error if he called.